While the world is divided between East and West, America and China, NATO and BRICS, India is doing something no one else is doing. It's sitting at all the tables at once. It's buying Russian oil under sanctions and selling petroleum products to Europe. It's joining BRICS and the Quad with America. It's waging a border war with China and engaging in trillion-dollar trade with it. This isn't weakness or hypocrisy. It's the strategy of a country that for the first time in 200 years feels that history is on its side and it intends to take advantage of it. Subscribe to the channel for more content and stay updated. In 1943, a British colonial administrator named John Herbert sat in his office in Calcutta and reviewed the grain export reports. Bengal was in the middle of a famine. Outside his window, people were dying in the streets at a rate that would eventually reach 3 million dead. Inside his office, the paperwork showed that grain shipments out of India to Britain had not slowed. They had increased. That famine was not a natural disaster. There was enough food in India to feed Bengal. It was redirected by policy, by calculation, by an empire that needed resources more than it needed the people those resources came from. That is the history that every Indian prime minister carries into every diplomatic meeting, not as emotion, as data. In 1700, India produced 27% of everything the global economy made. By 1947, when the British finally left, that number had fallen to 3%. The entire industrial capacity of the subcontinent had been systematically dismantled to protect British manufacturing. The railways Britain built were not built for India. They were built to move raw materials to ports faster. Jawaharlal Nehru understood this with the precision of a man who had spent 9 years in British prisons reading economic history. On Independence Day, he made one promise that has quietly governed every Indian foreign policy decision for the 8 decades since. Never again will this country place its survival in the hands of a single foreign power. Subscribe right now, because that one promise made in 1947 explains everything India is doing in the world today that confuses and frustrates Washington, Moscow, and Beijing simultaneously. The lesson cost 200 years and tens of millions of lives to learn. India has not forgotten a single page of it. On February 28, 2022, 4 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, India's finance ministry held a quiet internal meeting. The agenda was not about condemning the invasion. It was not about sanctions. It was about one question: how much Russian oil can we buy and at what discount? Within weeks, Indian state refineries were in direct negotiations with Rosneft. By April, the discounts being offered were extraordinary. Russian Urals crude was selling at $35 below the global market price. For a country that imports 85% of its oil, that number was not a diplomatic calculation. It was an economic emergency response that any rational government would have taken. What happened next is the part that nobody in Brussels or Washington will say out loud. India bought the discounted Russian crude, refined it in its world-class refineries in Gujarat and Rajasthan, and sold the finished petroleum products directly into European markets at full global prices. The same Europe that had sanctioned Russian energy was importing Indian diesel and jet fuel that had been Russian crude oil 3 weeks earlier. By 2023, India had become the largest buyer of seaborne Russian oil on Earth. It was processing over 1.7 million barrels per day. Its oil import bill dropped by 26%. Its petroleum product exports to Europe tripled. America knew. Europe knew. The Indian foreign minister was asked about it directly in a press conference and responded with a composure that was almost beautiful. He said, "We are doing what is in the best interest of our people. I would expect every responsible government to do the same." No sanctions followed, because sanctioning India in 2023 was simply not an option anyone in Washington was willing to consider. In September 2019, Narendra Modi walked onto a stage in Houston, Texas, in front of 50,000 Indian Americans and put his arm around Donald Trump. The crowd roared. Trump beamed. Modi called him a great friend of India. The images went around the world. Two nationalist leaders, two outsiders who had broken their respective establishments, a natural partnership. 6 months later, Trump imposed tariffs on Indian steel, aluminum, and pharmaceutical exports, and removed India from the generalized system of preferences that had given Indian goods preferential access to American markets for decades. No warning, no negotiation, just an executive order and a press release. Modi said nothing publicly. He sent a delegation to Washington, smiled through the meetings, and continued doing exactly what India had been doing before the friendship began: buying Russian military equipment, refusing to vote against Russia at the United Nations, expanding trade with Iran, building a rupee-based payment system specifically designed to reduce dollar dependency. Trump interpreted the Houston rally as loyalty. Modi had intended it as access. There's a difference that took Washington years to understand. Here's what makes the Modi and Trump dynamic one of the most instructive relationships in modern geopolitics. Trump operates on personal chemistry. If he likes you, the relationship is warm and the concessions flow. Modi understood this and invested precisely enough warmth to keep the relationship functional, while never once allowing it to constrain Indian strategic autonomy. India, under Modi, has signed defense agreements with America, Russia, and France simultaneously. It sits in the Quad Security Alliance with Washington while maintaining the single largest bilateral trade relationship with China of any Quad member. Every partner thinks India is leaning toward them. That is exactly the point. In 2016, a vegetable vendor named Ramesh in a Mumbai street market started accepting payments through an app on a second-hand smartphone. No bank account required, no card machine, no processing fee, just a QR code printed on a piece of paper taped to his cart and an instant transfer that settled in 3 seconds. Ramesh had no idea he was part of the most significant financial infrastructure project of the 21st century. The system was called UPI, Unified Payments Interface, built by a non-profit entity backed by the Indian government and launched quietly with almost no international coverage. In its first year, it processed 1 billion transactions. By 2023, it was processing 10 billion transactions per month, more than Visa and MasterCard combined within Indian borders. The country that Western financial institutions had spent decades trying to bring into the formal banking system had simply built its own system and made it better. But the story does not end at the Indian border. By 2024, UPI had been adopted in Singapore, UAE, France, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and 23 other countries. Indian tourists and workers abroad were settling transactions in rupees through Indian infrastructure without touching the dollar system at all. Here is why this terrifies the right people in the right rooms. SWIFT processes 45 million messages per day and charges fees at every step. UPI processes 500 million transactions per day and charges nothing. When developing nations look at those two numbers, they do not need a geopolitical lecture about dollar dependency. The math makes the argument by itself. India is not selling this system as an anti-dollar weapon. It is selling it as a public good, which makes it considerably more dangerous than any weapon, because nobody sanctions a public good. In 2001, an economist at Goldman Sachs wrote a paper predicting that by 2050, Brazil, Russia, India, and China would together surpass the G7 in economic output. His bosses considered it interesting speculation. 20 years later, the BRICS bloc had already surpassed the G7 in purchasing power parity and was adding new members faster than anyone had predicted. The world did not wait for permission to change. India today is the 5th largest economy on Earth, moving toward 3rd within a decade. It has a payment system running in 30 countries. It buys its oil from whoever offers the best price. It signs defense deals with adversaries simultaneously without apology. It abstains at the UN when abstaining serves its interests and votes yes when yes serves its interests. It has made strategic ambiguity into a science. What India has demonstrated to every mid-sized nation watching carefully is that there is now a third option. You do not have to be Washington's ally. You do not have to be Beijing's partner. You can build your own infrastructure, run your own payment systems, negotiate your own energy prices, and make every major power believe you are leaning toward them. The unipolar moment lasted 30 years. It ended not with a war or a financial crash, but with a vegetable vendor in Mumbai taping a QR code to his cart. If this video made you look at world politics differently, give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. Let me know in the comments, who do you think has the future, the dollar or the new systems? I read every comment. And subscribe. The next episode will be even more intense.